So before I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about specifically the decorum and what you guys offer in terms of products and services, excuse me. But before we do that, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about your personal journey with menswear. So for those who don't know who you are, could you tell us, well, who you are and what your journey and trajectory has been with menswear? How did you first get interested in it? And what made you want to pursue it as a venture?
Sure. So my name is Charles Yap. I'm born and bred in Singapore. As many people think, I'm a Singaporean, very much a Singaporean at heart, but with a very international outlook on things. I've spent a few years living in London as well as in Bangkok. And I've always been working in the area of hospitality, marketing, journalism. That's always been my background. So retail and menswear is a very new thing to me. So I'm 47 years old, probably among the oldest in the, many of the people I interact in the menswear community tend to be much younger than me. I see myself being the oldest uncle of the lot. And it's quite interesting when I talk to friends, they call me uncle, and I tell them that, well, if you call me uncle, I'll call you nephew. So I've got a few nephews around, and some of whom I've not even met in person, which is the way Instagram goes, right? You tend to make friends, and with the way the algorithm goes, you tend to get attracted or get the attention of like-minded people who dress probably a similar way. So the world is getting smaller. So I would say, how did my interest in menswear start? I would say that in my earlier years, in my early to mid 20s, I've always been interested in suiting up. Wearing the whole prospect of wearing a nicely crafted jacket, a suit with a tie, it always appealed to me. But it wasn't until 4 years ago when I discovered what real classic style meant. Because when it comes to wearing a suit, there's just so many categories. I've always been playing around with, I guess, for lack of a better description, the lower end of the market, more of the locally made items. We're not talking about, well-crafted clothes and fabrics. We're more talking about polyester or blended material. We're talking about fused construction suits. I was playing in that space for probably 20 years.
If you don't mind me pausing you there just for a second, what was it initially that attracted you to getting suited up? Like what was it that appealed to you? Why were you interested in it in the first place?
So when I was growing up in Singapore, I went to a school called Anglo-Chinese School. It's a very well-established school with its roots in British history. In fact, the founder of my school back then, Anglo-Chinese, was this guy called Oldham, who is a British gentleman who came to Singapore, founded the school. So in terms of school upbringing, we would be wearing a tie on Mondays. And I enjoyed wearing a tie back then as a kid, even though majority of my classmates thought it was a chore. So that was, I think that was my first experience with something as classic, something that's classically menswear driven. So, having that school tie, which I think I still have, I have to dig deep. Of course, it's made of polyester and all. It's not the best, but I think it started off my journey. And over time, as I grew up and went into hospitality, in the world of hotels, wearing a suit is pretty much a commonplace. And that's where I started experimenting as well with local tailors, experimenting with blended fabrics. Back then, 20 years ago, there weren't many options. Even if I wanted to perhaps, go with Neapolitan, Florentine, back in Singapore 20 years ago, that was not possible in my early 20s. So it was really a case of playing with what's locally available. And also, as I got a bit more affluent, as my income grew, I started experimenting with more of the designer brands. I think brands we don't really have to mention in this chat, but more of the mainstream fast fashion premium kind of brands that we all probably had touched, we all grew up with. So I played in that space, and it was really a case of trying off the rack items, trying on things from sales, sample sales. When I was living in London, it was a case of Great Molton Street, had the music room at Great Molton Street being a venue for really good sales by, either the premium fast fashion brands or even some of the more mass market several names. So they would put their off-season items out there for people to try and for people to buy at a cheaper price. And that was when I experimented with different things as well, accessories, more of a play on colorful socks, that kind of thing. So that was how things started, probably, from between 20 to 15 years ago. So I've always been, when people meet me, I think there's this personal branding that has always stuck with me. It's always a case of, you look sharp, you look dapper, you look what is that, immaculate sometimes, or you look just well put together, well groomed. It's always been something I have lived with. So but it's a case of I think for many of us who are really into classic menswear, it's also the awakening or the reawakening. The one moment when you just go, hey, I should be looking at something that's a bit different. I should be looking at wider lapels. I should be looking at softer shoulders. I should be looking at something that's better constructed. And for me as well, living in the tropics, in Singapore, in Thailand, where I spent a lot of my last few years, it's a hot climate. We're talking about 34 degrees Celsius in the daytime, high humidity. So I started thinking, if I'm wearing a suit and I'm not comfortable, and in most cases, the kind of clothing I was used to before I transformed, I guess, for lack of a better word, before I could transform sartorially, or before I transformed to this whole classic approach to menswear, it was really more about tighter fits, which we all have been through as well in some earlier stages of our lives. We're talking about much tighter fits. We're talking about lots of padding, lots of unnecessary construction, because you weren't paying for the artistry that you are used to now. So back then, it was also a case of, how do I make myself feel more comfortable? How do I feel better in my clothes? How do I go to perhaps even a semi-outdoor event and not die from the heat and from the sweat? And how do I, even thought to myself, how do I prevent having the underarm patches of sweat, which used to be so prevalent before the switch over, but right now with the right clothes, the right materials, the right lightweight construction, I seem to have stopped experiencing that level of discomfort. So, it's for a combination of practical reasons, and also, I guess as we get a bit older, the quest towards something that's more long-lasting, something that's more of an investment rather than throwaway pieces that you just don't care too much about.
Yeah, would you say that, I think you were kind of hinting at it here, that part of the reason why you became so invested in the quality of the fabrics was, as you said, out of necessity. You said that, growing up in Singapore, you said that is, I've never been to Singapore yet. So you said that that's a tropical climate. So It's almost like that kind of environment would force it upon you to really, really take into consideration the fabrics, where there might be cooler parts of, the world where you wouldn't have to be so precise about the fabrics.
That's right. That's true. And I also want to share with you, my whole interest in classic menswear started not with clothes, but on the shoe side of things. Because back then, a good friend of mine who runs a really successful business in Singapore, his name is John Chung. He runs Mason and Smith. He was the world shoeshine champion in 2019 or maybe 2018. I was living in Bangkok back then, and through Instagram searches, I found that he was coming to Bangkok for a trunk show at a really well-known store, which is called the Som Chai, which is also a friendly competitor to the Decorum in Bangkok. So I signed up for that, not knowing anything. I just wanted to meet this guy who's, being a Singaporean who's on the world stage as a shoeshine champion, and me with my interest in shoes. And I've always wanted to, the whole art of making a pair of shoes shine, or having the mirror shine tips, appealed to me back then, about that was 4 years ago. And I decided I would sign up for his workshop, paid him a visit. And then it was then when the owner of that store, which stocked brands like Orazio and Livrano, noticed that I could be his really I could be a very prime target for transformation. So a few weeks after the workshop, I brought a pair of shoes in, I got it shine, and I learned how to shine, and I started, getting interested in shoe shine. He gave me a call and said, Charles, my name is Lapas. We met in my shop. I would like to invite you to come in and try out some of our items. Of course, he did his research. He's seen my Instagram photos. He's seen the way I dressed. I think he saw some potential in me, where this guy's got a pretty good sense of aesthetics. And, the combination seemed right. It's just not quite the right kind of workmanship, not quite the right kind of quality. It was a case where maybe he thought in his mind that this guy is not a lost cause. Let me just contact him. And he was really nice about it. So I went to visit his shop. And one of the first things I put on was a Livrano jacket. And I looked at myself, and back then my first encounter was, this is not me. It just felt so loose, but beautifully loose. It's not loose to the degree that I looked sick. It just felt so comfortable, so light. I even mentioned that when I put on that jacket, it gave me the feeling of an orgasm. And, I openly speak about it as well. That, very seldom do you get a feeling, when you put on a specific piece of garment, you get the feeling that, oh my gosh, it's just so, where has this been all this while? I've been looking for you. It gave me it gave me that impression, but I was still not ready to take the plunge because, when you're so used to dressing a certain way and you're so used to seeing yourself in the mirror with tighter fit clothing, it's hard to let go. So it took me a while, and I think it was a second visit when I went with a few trusted friends when I decided, I think I'm ready to take this plunge. But it was also a very big monetary investment because, for a piece of Livrano ready-to-wear jacket that I bought back then, that was my first piece. People start somewhere perhaps entry level or more conservative. I went almost at the top of the game because I was able to. Financially, I was stable. And I was in my mid-40s or, early to mid-40s. I think that's the beauty of starting out late. So I purchased it. I waited 2 weeks for the buttonholes to be done. No alterations required. And that was my first piece. And that really, I think that kickstarted everything else for me. In terms
you don't mind me asking, how much did it cost you?
I would say it's difficult to talk about pricing because of the way things are. And that's been a few years ago. But, and also you have to understand that in Thailand, the taxation rates make things a lot more expensive. But let's put it this way. One ready-to-wear Livrano jacket, which I bought, could have bought me 15 of my former suits from local tailors.
Wow.
So you must understand I'm just putting that out to articulate the big jump in terms of, it was a really massive transformation. And of course, back then I was watching lots of YouTube videos. I was looking at the Parisian Gentleman. You probably aware of him as well. He was one of my, I would say, early mentors from a YouTube perspective, where I was looking at his channel. And over time, of course, the repertoire grew. I'm looking at much different content, but I'm still watching him as well. Him and Sonia, I would say that both Hugo and Sonia played a big part in shaping my early understanding of what being sartorial meant. And I wouldn't even describe myself as being sartorial. I think that's not quite a term I would use on myself, but more of a lover of classic menswear and long-lasting, slow fashion, if you will.